Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Gilda Evans, bringing you the Autism Resource Podcast. This podcast and the ARP website are your one stop knowledge and resource base for autism and much more. I'm very happy to have Dr. Ali Lankerani join me as my guest today, also known as Dr. L. Dr. L is a family advocate, a consultant to the United Nations, a clinical neuroscientist, and a children's performance optimizer. He is the creator of Role Model Maker, founder of the Amazing Parents Network, and director of Foundation for Optimal Beginnings. Welcome, Dr. L, and thanks so much for taking the time to join me and discuss the work that you do today.
Absolutely. I'm super excited to be here. Thank you, Gilda, for having me today.
So, to get us started, tell me a little bit about how you got involved with neurodiversity.
It's very simple. I actually got involved because I have ADHD myself, and I grew up in Iran. And at the time that I was growing up, there was this atmosphere of competitiveness because if you didn't get into the universities, you would have to go to the front lines and fight in the Iran-Iraq war. So there was this big push about performance and achievement. And of course, with ADHD, that is tends to be a challenge for us to be able to be on par. But nevertheless, I was performing well, but it took a lot of extra effort. So that's the first place. But I always joke that it only took me a postdoctorate to figure out actually what was going on with me. And when I got my neurodevelopmental disorders expertise, that's when I found out, these are the symptoms and this is what was going on. Because it wasn't a thing back then. We didn't have full diagnosis and awareness of the conditions back then. But anyway, so that's basically the beginning and the end of it.
So, what does it mean developmentally to be neurodivergent?
So I'm glad that you asked this because when I was going through school, as I just mentioned to you, it was called neurodevelopmental disorders. Now we don't necessarily call that a disorder. We actually call it neurodiversity because we find out that whether it is autism, whether it is ADD and ADHD, Tourette's, Asperger's, dyslexia, all of these things, they fall on a spectrum and it actually highlights or features different areas of the brain that tend to be more or less dominant compared to the other parts. So all of us have various pieces of this. But when it comes to neurodiversity, these are the kids that in general tend to fall into the autism spectrum of features and the conditions that I just mentioned.
Okay, what do you feel is the biggest challenge society as well as families face when it comes to supporting neurodivergent children?
When I was in private practice, I found that two biggest areas I, as the healthcare provider, saw the challenge was number one was patient awareness, understanding and noticing and recognizing and accepting that, hey, your child needs to have special attention. So that was one part of it. The other part is the education part, that now that you recognize, hey, your child might need some special attention, what do you need to do about it? Because many of the parents were going to various modalities and treatment centers trying to basically throw everything at the wall. Hopefully something would stick. And this is financially exhausting, relationship wise is exhausting, and also time wise is very time consuming. So it affects your career and everything else as well. So these were some of the biggest challenges from our end. The other part was sometimes parents, because of their upbringing and their backgrounds, inadvertently they would actually get in the way of their children's progress once the treatments that I used to prescribe were being implemented. So that's actually how I got the title Parent Whisperer, because once I would educate the parents, then everything would fall into place and the children would go ahead and get back on track really fast. And it was a lot easier to address that. So those were the challenges that I faced during my time in private practice. I don't think that has changed since. I think we are a lot more aware nowadays. But one of the things I think is important for the society as a whole to understand is that there's nothing wrong with this group of people. In fact, most of the progress and amazing things that we experience on a daily basis is the byproduct, the fruit of these people's imaginations, thinking, and processing abilities. So we need to, rather than try to nurture them as if they're this fragile thing, we need to actually look at them as somebody that can be a leader, somebody that can be an inventor or a change maker in the world, and support and inspire them to live up to their full potential and get them to understand themselves better. Because for me, it took me 40 years to figure that out. And once I figured that out, it really mushroomed when I realized the things that people used to point out to as my weaknesses were actually my strength. And I just needed to know how to work differently with my body.
I could not agree with you more in terms of what would this world be without people who are considered neurodivergent. It would be a very different world, and I think not as wonderful a world, to be quite honest. And I'll just interject a little bit about my personal philosophy here. I think, frankly, we're all on the human spectrum, aren't we? I've never met a single person, whether they're considered neurodivergent, neurotypical, what have you, who doesn't have their own faults, foibles, idiosyncrasies, stuff. And it's just about finding out where you vibrate, right? We're all on the spectrum. Are you ultraviolet? Are you visible? Are you infrared? And connecting with that vibration and building the bridge and finding the right way to support and communicate. That's my personal philosophy. And I hope that a lot of other people think that way and a lot more will begin to think that way.
Because this is a developmental thing, I want the audience to also be aware of this, that our society, our environment is changing so rapidly, and our body is so amazing that it tries to adapt to that change. So while we might not have had the need for neurodiverse kids 200, 300 years ago. Doesn't mean they weren't there, but not as prevalent. Nowadays, there are more because the society has changed so much that the needs for individuals to be able to contribute, to be productive members of society is literally different. So our brain develops differently as a result of it as well to accommodate that need. So we need to consider that these are modern brains basically coming on board.
Absolutely. Give me some of your top tips and suggestions for families in terms of how to best support their neurodivergent children.
Let me go back to the question you asked about neurodivergent and what it really means, because we need to understand that our brain is not the biggest brain on the planet. But the way that it develops its power is through networking and connecting different parts of it. And we are really good at doing that. We are one of the few species that is born with our brains not fully developed yet. So we're actually not viable for 6 months to 2 years after we come out of the womb. And unless we have that nurture and the care, we are not in a position to be able to survive. That process of what happens in that 6 months to a year is crucial for our brain to really pick up and all of this different hardwares to start connecting and working in unison. And once that happens, then the brain tries to connect with the body. And once we have the mind body control, the logical next step is for it to connect to its environment. So that's when we have the social aspect of communication and interacting with our environment. And now in today's world, we also have a virtual environment that we also at some point, 6 years or after, we need to get engaged with as well, but not before 6 years, because that alters how our brain gets structured physically. That being said, how we introduce those to the brain causes us to shape how it develops. And as a result, its connections and its strengths and weaknesses alter. So, and our brain is accomplished that if one area is weak, then another area tries to compensate for it. But over our evolution, our brain has become super specialized. So they can't always do the same thing. Your left hand and your right hand, they can back each other up. But there are certain things that your left hand can't do, and there are certain things that your right hand can't do for your left hand, right? Because there's a little bit of a difference. In our brain, that's even more pronounced. So what ends up happening with neurodiverse people is that if there's an area of weakness, the other area that its mirror counterpart, it really tries to step up and help. So most of the neurodiverse people have an area that tends to be slower and then have an area that has savant skills, basically. So depending on when you discover a person's neurodiversity, you can decide whether you can bring balance to the brain or you can actually accommodate for the changes that has been created. Based on that, you can determine the course for the rest of their life as far as what they would excel at, what they would be good at, or whether they need to do something specific to make sure that they make the most of the beautiful brain that they have.
Can you expand on that just a little bit when you say whether you bring balance or whether you support the particular savant skills or particular focus that the brain has developed?
Starting, let's go back to diagnosis and medical treatment. You might find out, and some of our listeners might actually be familiar with this, that we don't diagnose autism until 6 years of age. And part of the reason is not just because of the labeling, but also because there is a lot of opportunities for you to be able to rewire the brain. And you can go ahead and strengthen an area that might be weak so that it rises up to the occasion as far as what it needs to do. And when that happens, the symptoms of autism cease to exist. And remember, the brain controls the function of many different things in the body. So when you have an area of weakness in the brain, it can manifest itself in many different parts of your body. So this is what I was saying during the private practice, that they were going from therapist to therapist and doing many different things because it's manifesting as a digestive issue and an autoimmune issue and a skin issue and a coordination issue and and a learning issue, right? And it's not all of these different things. It's one area creating all of this. So if you address that one area, all of these symptoms, the symptoms tend to go away, basically. The symptoms are an indicator of which area of the brain it is that you're focused on. So up until the age of 6, you can pretty much go ahead and eliminate or minimize the effect. From 6 to 12 years of age, you can go ahead and strengthen the area, but then you will see these personality peculiarities, for lack of a better word, basically, that this person has these preferences or habits or tendencies, basically. Up until 12 years of age, you can really go ahead and, when we're talking about balance, bring it to a level where a person that encounters that person, they won't even recognize that person is neurodiverse. From 12 to 18 years of age, now these things are becoming more structured within the brain, meaning that there's literally more neurons or less neurons. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't do anything about it because our brain is plastic all the way into our senior years. But now you actually have structural differences that shows that your brain prefers certain pathways over another, right? So if you had to get someplace really fast, would you choose the trail through the woods or would you take the superhighway? Your brain naturally picks the superhighway. So knowing that, we always need to accommodate and make sure that we bring certain habits back into perspective so that the person is constantly working on, I don't want to call it balancing, but strengthening those areas that don't come naturally. After the 18 years of age, after we become adult, and actually that could be as late as 25, what ends up happening is now you want to compensate or accommodate. And what I mean by that is that at this point, you've developed your personality, your habits, and who you are. And what ends up happening is you can simply choose that these are your strengths, these are your weaknesses, and you're going to focus on your strengths and you're going to find support for your weaknesses. Now, we all as human beings have strengths and weaknesses. That's why I said we're all on that spectrum. But for neurodiverse kids, this is more palpated, this is more pronounced. So they notice that in certain areas, they have trouble areas that they need support on. And it's totally fine. And there's plenty of support out there, but you need to be able to identify those, recognize those so you can go ahead and seek the support that you need. That was what I experienced when I was 40 and almost 50 years of age before I actually figured out how to work with my body. You've heard of play into people's strengths, right? And you've also heard the side that you're only as strong as your weakest link. Both of these have their places in brain development and neurodiversity. When somebody is very young, you want to make sure that you strengthen the weak links, the areas that a person has weakness. So if somebody has social challenges, then you want to focus on addressing those social issues, basically. When somebody has academic challenges, you want to focus on the academic challenges. But then when you get to a certain point in young adulthood, then what ends up happening is, you know what, I'm not a social person or I'm not academically inclined. And at that point, there's like, that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist in your world. You still need to be social. You still need to be able to learn things. So how can you find support for yourself to receive the academic growth, to receive the social growth as you need it? Let's say somebody's social, but then weak academically, then what you can do is the social side is very natural. So you will excel in anything that is a social, has a social component. But then you still need to learn things about the social world that you're stepping into. That part is academic. So you need to find ways to get support so that you can excel even more in your social life. And usually that's the difference between neurodiverse people becoming a change maker or somebody the family feels they need special aid and special assistance. It's that identification of where they need support and do we build a system to support them on a regular basis. If we can do that, then this person will achieve things that most normal people will never even dream of being possible.
And I saw you put that word normal in air quotes, and I agree
Yeah,
with you on that. But yeah, I do have one question though. You said we don't diagnose autism until the age of 6. I do know of people who have had children diagnosed prior to that. So, what do you have to say to those people who receive the diagnosis at, let's say, 3 or 4 or 5?
most of the stuff, of course, we're talking about here is overall big generalizations. A physician, through proper evaluation, can determine better, but especially when you have high functioning and low functioning conditions, right? So, in the functioning conditions, this will show up much faster. And the other part is that there are times when it's not necessarily just a physiologic development. There's an anatomical part. For instance, somebody got into a car accident and there was massive head trauma, those type of things, or there was some unusual circumstance during pregnancy. So there are things like that kind of is a checkbox basically. It's like, all right, this person has these things, so it's very likely that this is how it's going to manifest itself. It's not necessarily a bad thing to be diagnosed earlier. It just means that you need to be more proactive about really seeking the actual occupational therapist or whoever it needs to be that really addresses that. And clinical psychologists are really good at honing in on those details, basically.
All right, thank you for
Neuroclinical.
clarifying that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Now, I know you're involved in a lot of programs and projects. Can you talk a bit about those and describe them for me briefly?
Absolutely. I just realized I started answering your question, but because of my ADHD, I forgot to finish it. When you
Oh,
talked about there are four fundamental things that our brain needs to evolve and also stay healthy throughout our lifetime. So this applies as much to the kids as it does to grown-ups. And if you really want to teach this to your kids, the best way to do this is to role model the behavior, right? So our goal is to make sure that these four things are prioritized. And sometimes, whether it is the parents' views, family views, social views, or whatever it is, it overrides these priorities. And it can't because then you're swimming upstream against nature, and Mother Nature will always win. So, when it comes to your brain, it needs these four things in the particular order that I'm about to give you. So, first one is sleep, second one is oxygen. Third one is nutrition. And fourth one is neural stimulation via movement, whole body movement. Okay, so I'll repeat it again: sleep, oxygen, nutrition, and then movement. And if you don't have this incorporated into a daily routine, then all the other stuff that comes, remember I said first is the mind connecting to itself, then it's mind body. Movement is mind body. The biggest benefit of exercise is not building muscles or cardiovascular, is the mind body connection. If you do these first three, which is sleep, oxygen, and nutrition, then your body is ready for mind body, which is movement. Now, the next step is you connecting to your outside world and interacting with them. In order to do that, you need to have these four. So, relationships is the next thing. academics is after relationships. But how many times do we actually go ahead and push the kids to stay up late to do academics? Talk about misprioritization of things. How many times do we focus on relationships and social settings? Like it's a birthday party and we got to give all kinds of garbage food to our kids and establish this habit of going ahead and every social gathering doing damage to our bodies, right? Let's backtrack and prioritize things. If you can do this for yourself and then teach this to your kids, that it follows in that order, that you go ahead and you go sleep, oxygen, nutrition, movement, relationships. And when it comes to relationships, we're talking about how you talk to yourself and your own relationship. Are you kind to yourself? And then how you talk to your family and your friends, and then ultimately how you show up in the world. And that applies to careers and all kinds of stuff there as well. And then lastly, academics. Academics is a way for people to find fulfillment in things that they are passionate about. It's a spiritual journey, but oftentimes we look at it as a pathway to a career, and we think of career as money and finances, and it just goes off on a completely different than what it was intended for, basically. I love the kids to be imaginative, curious, natural learners, and to be able to be lifelong learners. And that's a spiritual journey. That is not an academic journey. That is not a monetary journey, basically, a wealth journey. Anyways, so those are my tips. So that's the first thing I wanted to mention. If you could practice this and teach this to your kids, the world would be a better place. As far as the programs that you're talking about, initially, when I left private practice, part of the reason I left was because I felt like I was bound to the brick and mortar system, and the information I was presenting to the patients was not just limited to neurodiverse kids and their families, but to everybody in the world. And we could all be supportive of our health and our fulfillment of our potentials, basically. So I came to the online world. Of course, back then everybody said telemedicine and online medicine is not a thing. This was way before COVID. So when COVID happened, everybody realized, oh, we might not have another choice. And then everybody rushed in. And that kind of pushed me into a completely different sphere, which is not only did I have the support programs for families, but now a lot of experts were coming to me and asking me, how can we go ahead and do what you're doing and serve our families? So I stepped into a leadership role. We created a community of experts that serve families globally. And then from there, as they started being more effective in reaching out to families, I think our last event this year, last month, reached 3.86 million people. So at that point, I'm like, you know what? We need to now step into a different sphere where I focus on policy change. So we're not constantly undoing some of the stuff that's happening in society and eradicating age-old problems, basically. So I also am a consultant to the United Nations, and I've participated in a couple of big events for the marginalized groups, women, children, specifically, and also planning policies for the next 30 years. The agenda, believe it or not, was set last year for the next 30 years. So our listeners, your kids and your grandkids will be affected by the policies that went into effect last year. And it was ratified by over 130, 140 countries as good policies that would be more conscious of our generational progress and evolution as well, and not just what we need to do today. So it was very promising.
My goodness, sounds like wonderful projects that you're involved in, and also a lot of good advice to live by. Is there anything at this point that we haven't covered that I haven't asked that you want to mention to our listeners?
I have this message for anybody who's listening, and if anybody wants to spread this message out to their community, I appreciate it. I believe supporting families and raising happy, healthy, and fulfilled or hopeful families is civic responsibility. I think it is something that perpetuates our civilization, our quality of life, and is really important for us to start at home, but also be able to support families in our communities as well. If you're interested, if you can check out Amazon, we have a parenting owner's manual, which is a compilation book of 50 different experts from our events that have presented in the past several years. And it's a bestseller. So feel free to check that out on Amazon. It's called Parenting Owner's Manual. And if you want to learn more about what we do at Role Model Maker International, as well as our nonprofit Foundation for Optimal Beginnings, you can go to rolemodelmaker.com/international, and you can find different ways to connect with us, interact with us, and support our cause.
Thank you, Dr. L, so much for your time and for sharing your story with us today.
Appreciate it, Gilda. It was a pleasure. I love the questions that you had. It was very insightful and helped me open up and explain those details, despite my ADHD. And I hope that I was of benefit to our listeners today.
Absolutely, and you're welcome back anytime.
Thank you.
If you like what you hear, please subscribe to the podcast. You can find it on Apple iTunes, Amazon Music, Spotify, and other popular platforms. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And if you would like more information on this topic or anything else we've covered on the Autism Resource Podcast, visit us online at autismresourceproject.org/podcast. If you have a topic you'd like us to cover in the future, contact us through the website or comment on any of our social media channels. And be sure to check out our growing website often, since we are continually adding useful information and resources. I want to thank our listeners for spending part of their day with us. This is the Autism Resource Podcast, and I'm Gilda Evans, reminding you to take care of yourself and that special person in your life.